Continuing series in Witnesses and Voices of the Holocaust. We began this series with Paul Fleming as he gave a historical overview of the Holocaust, and then we have had a child survivor, Francis Cutler. We've had Eric Rosenfeld, who came to this country on the Kinder transport. Rosenfeld, yes. We had his wife Eva, who came on the Haven Project. And today we have Esther Loeb. And Esther is going to talk about life and death in the camps. And it's a very powerful story. I ask that you give your complete attention because remember, I want to make sure I tell all of you, we can see and hear you. So we first want to indicate that you need to mute your mics and make sure that you aren't lying down on the job, okay? We want you to listen to this story because at the end, we want to have your questions. We're so glad to have you with us and especially glad to have Esther. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the lovely introduction.
You're welcome.
And I appreciate you all coming to listen to my story. And I wish each and every one of you a good morning. Let me hear you. Good morning. You go.
Good morning.
They're saying good morning.
Yeah, well, thank you. I've been talking about Holocaust for 23 years, and it's always hard for me to start because I get very emotional. I used to not to, but getting older, I become more mellow, and it is very emotional. And sometimes I wonder, should I start from the beginning or the end or the middle? But I think I'll start from the beginning. I do speak to a lot of children. I don't mean no little ones. I'm talking about 13 and up, teenagers. And the first thing they ask me, Miss Loeb, why do you think you have survived? And it's a very hard question to answer. And with kids, you have to be very truthful. They know when you tell a story and when you tell the truth. And I said to myself, why did I survive? Why did some of us survive all those tragedies and horrors? And then I thought about God, and I said, you know something? I think God works in mysterious ways. And He made some of us survive so we can come to you and to the whole world and tell our stories. Because you'll be surprised that people still don't know anything about a Holocaust. Well, I am a survivor. And I have survived. Thank the Lord. Thank God. And here I am, trying to tell you a little bit from my life. I was born in Poland, lived in a beautiful city, parks, flowers, statues. It was beautiful, spotless, theaters, cinemas, restaurants. Unfortunately, we were not allowed to some of the places. I lived in the city of Bromberg. And there were 50% Germans, 50% Poles, and a very small minority of Jewish families. And we lived in fear all my life. Going to school, I was verbally abused. I've been thrown, some kids threw rocks at me, not too many, but some of them have. But what hurt most of all is the kids would not play with me. And when you're a young little girl, you want to play, and nobody would play with you. And it was the hardest thing that ever happened that I remember today, and just breaks my heart even today, because they did not play with me. This is the kind of life we had. But going home, we had a lovely home, a love from our parents. It was respect and love in our home. My parents had 2 stores ready to wear menswear. And we have in a way, been very happy because we had our families. Just before the war in 1939, Hitler decided he would like to have the corridor, which was in Poland, and it was smack through our city of Bromberg. My mother had a German friend lady, and she told her, you better take your children and send these children deeper into Poland, because when Germany is going to come through this corridor and through our city, they are going to really mistreat your children first. And my mother says, don't be silly. Where am I going to send them? I was born here. This is my home. This is my country. She says, you better listen to me and take your kids and send them deeper into Poland. And I guess my mother finally listened to her, and she took my sister and I and sent us to the city of Lodz, L-O-D-Z. And it was deeper into Poland to her sister. And of course, Poland had no idea that Germany will attack Poland and take Poland within 3 weeks. Poland was not prepared for a war. They thought they just want the corridor and that'd be it. Unfortunately, September 1st, 1939, the war broke out. And they started bombing Poland. And my parents were left in Bromberg, and we were in the city of Lodz, so we were separated. Eventually, my parents decided that it's not good for them to be there, and they locked the stores or locked the house, took whatever little they could carry, and traveled at night, and were hiding in the daytime to get to the city of Lodz where we were. And it took him 2 weeks to get to us, and it took Germany 3 weeks to conquer Poland. And that's where just a little bit of the monstrosity, brutality, and the sadism began. For example, they have taken old women, and I mean old women. They have given them a bucket and a brush, and they told them to brush and clean the concrete sidewalks backwards. And you know, even if you do it backward, you have to lift your knees to go backward. They would not let them lift their knees, but they had to slide them on the concrete. And that's when the skin broke and they were bleeding. And the more they bled, the more they cried and did what they did. They stood there and were laughing, and nobody could come and help those poor old women. And after 2-3 hours, they told them to quit. They can get up and go. But they couldn't get up by themselves. And they could not lean on the bucket to get a little bit of support. They would not let them. In the awkward position that they have tried to get up, and the more awkward they were, the better they liked it. And they were standing there laughing at these old women. They were so humiliated. The tears ran from their eyes. They were shaking with fear, and somehow they got up and they left. They have seen a young man or old man with a beard. They called them over and they started a conversation with him. In the conversation, they took out a cigarette and lit a match. But they didn't light the cigarette. They put the match to the man's beard. And the screaming of agony, and the man started to run, and he was screaming something terribly. And they just stood there laughing, but they have done such a wonderful thing. Then they decided that they need 150 young men and women, age 18 to 25, to work. No parents would give their children, and no husbands or wife would go. So what they did, they have taken 10 men each day, and they shot the third, the fifth, or whatever they decided. Each day they shot a person. And they said, we're going to do this until we get these people to go to work. Eventually, They drew lots, and we got 150 young men and women, age 18 to 25, and they put them on trucks. That was the beginning, mind you, that people didn't know what's going to happen. The cruelty was already beginning. And they took these people into, I'm choking, into a forest, and have divided half of the women and half of the men, took half of them away to a warehouse where they beat them, raped them, and shot them. In the meantime, the other half that was left in the forest, they were supposed to dig a ditch. And when they killed all those people, half of the people, they put their dead bodies on a truck. They came back to the other half and dropped them in the ditch and covered it up. So nobody will know, nobody will ever know that there were dead bodies there. Then they brought them back to the city. And when the parents ran to the trucks, or the spouses, or the wives, or the husbands, where is my wife, or where is my child, or where is my son, or where is my daughter? They beat them up, because how dare you question a German soldier? And what they did tell the other half, if any one of you will say what happened here, we're going to kill each and every one in your family. So they were petrified and would never say anything to anybody what happened in the forest. Then the Germany decided to take from 17 to 18, 19, and 20. And the whole horror began again. And when they got through with that age, they decided to take from 7 to 12. That's when my parents decided, we cannot stay here. We're all going to die eventually. I have to protect my family, my wife and my children. I have to escape somehow. Well, I don't know how my parents did that, but they smuggled us from the city to a river, and there were small boats coming, and they took these people across the river, which was Ukraine. When we finally went on those little boats used to come, and people rushed to the boats, they're trying to get on, and these smugglers used to shoot in the air, and he said, if you're going to run and overpower those boats, they're going to sink, and we won't be able to take you people across. Well, finally, my father took my sister and I on a boat, and my mother was coming when they said, stop, that's it, no more. And my father was begging to swap places with my mother, but they started the motor and they left. So my father and my sister and I were in one place, and my mother was left behind. And when we came across, there were Ukrainian soldiers, and they took everything, whatever people had, a little money, a little jewelry, some of the heavy coats. They took everything that people had, just left us only what we had on. And it was pouring rain. It was so terribly cold. And we had nowhere to go. We had no money. And my sister and I couldn't understand what's going on. And we asked Daddy, we are cold and we're hungry, we want something to eat. And I remember my daddy used to knock on every door and beg for somebody to take me and my sister in just for one night. Nobody would. So he finally come to a church. And he went inside and asked the father, could we please stay inside because it was raining outside? And the preacher said, yes, you can stay here when it's raining. But when it's not raining, you have to be outside. So we stayed that night in the church. And next day we had to go out because it was not raining anymore. And my father used to go on the markets to all these places and beg for a piece of bread for my sister and I and himself. But we had to stay there waiting for my mama. We couldn't leave anywhere, waiting for mama. Eventually, after about a week, my mother came in. She decided to cross the river. It froze. And she decided to cross the river all by herself so nobody would pay any attention to her. And she did. And we finally were together again. We were so happy to be together. I cannot even describe it to you. We were just hugging and crying and crying and hugging. We had no home. We had no money. We had no food. We were actually starving. And there was an elderly lady, and she came to my mom, and she says, you know something? I have a little farm not far from here, and I have a barn, and it's nothing in the barn. It's empty. If you want to make your home there for a few days, you're more than welcome, which we did. And we stayed about 2 weeks over there. And there's one early morning, there was a knock on the door, knocking on the door. And my father went and said, who is it? They were Russian soldiers. And they said, out, out, all of you spies, out. And they took my parents and, of course, us, my sister and I, for interrogation. And they accused my father and my mom that they were spies. And my father told them, I am not a spy. I am a Polish citizen trying to escape the Nazis to save my family. We've been with the Nazis for 6 months, and we've headed up to here. He says, but now you came to spy on us, and if you're not going to say that you're a spy and sign this, we're going to send you to Siberia. My father says, you can send me anywhere you want to, but I'm not signing anything. You cannot make me sign anything. So what they did, they put us on a freighter on the sea. And we were, I don't know how long we were. We were starving, people were sick. Women gave birth to children who died. And they finally brought us to an island. And it was surrounded by water. And let us off on that island. And the island was called Sibirskaya Taiga, which is Siberian jungle. And the mosquitoes, they were like 1 inch long. And they only went for your eyes to have given us a little pieces of net. So we put it out over our faces. And they left a little bit of potato, some flour, some salt, and a little bit of meat. And this is it. They said, once a month we're going to come and bring you some to eat. And it was an island. We had to have fire day and night. There were animals. There were snakes. It was a horrible place. And they did not come every month, but they came just about once every 2 months. Anyway, we were there about 4 months. Then they came again, put us again on a freighter, and we were again on the sea, I don't know how long. Then they stopped the freighter. We came to a port, and they put us on trains, and we were going on the trains for about 5-6 days. It was horrible. Then they put us on trucks, and the closer we got, the colder it got, till we finally brought us to Siberia. Well, I cannot even describe to you the freezing, the weather. It was snowing constantly. It was 30 and 40 degrees below zero. When you open your mouth, your tongue stuck to your teeth or to your lips. You had to cover your face so you can breathe. You couldn't even take a deep breath. That's how cold it was. And they brought us to barracks, long, ugly-looking barracks, with shattered windows and doors off the hinges. And it was an eerie sound, like a howl, like through the corridor. It was scary. It was petrifying. And we were hungry and cold. We were beat. We just didn't care anymore. And then each family got a little room with a concrete floor and some hay on it, and this is supposed to be our bed. And each family got one blanket. And you had to get up in the morning and go to work. If you didn't work, you didn't eat. And we used to get up early in the morning. It was so bitter cold. And we used to put newspapers, whatever clothes we had on, we used to put newspapers on our bodies that's supposed to prevent the wind to get to your body. It didn't help. It was so terribly cold. People had frostbites on their fingers, on their toes, their ears. They used to give us, the family, maybe a little bit more than this glass, maybe of borscht soup. And there were just a few pieces of cabbage and a few pieces of potato peels, if you find some. And they were all people with their families. And you know what they did? They lay in the snow at night and they froze themselves to death so the family would have a little bit of more food to share between their families, between the children. Children were born dead. It was starvation. It was sickness, diseases, freezing cold weather, death, hard work. And that's how we lived. And then my father couldn't get up one morning. He was burning up with fever. And I went to the guard outside and asked him if there is a place we can take my father. He says, what for? You are going to die here anyway. So what's the difference? And it was also brutality. It was rape and beating. And everybody tried to be quiet. We walked like zombies. We were afraid to say anything to anybody. It was a pitiful sight. They have taken your self-respect. They've taken your soul and your heart. You lost your faith in everything. And the only question you ask is, why? But there was no answer. Why? Eventually, we found a guide that he said there is a little clinic about a quarter of a mile from our camp. And if you can make it, maybe they'll help your father. So my sister and I took my father and carried him, almost carried him in all that snow. And we brought him to that little clinic, and they put out the cot. They put him on the cot, give him a couple aspirins, and that's how he was laying there. In the meantime, I didn't know it, my sister didn't know it, but my mother was pregnant, and she had a little boy. And the boy was 7 days old when my father died. And my father was 36 years old. They've taken my father's body, and they put him in a casket, all beat up with plenty of holes, casket. They put his body on a sled with a horse, and my sister and I walked behind the sled, supposedly to the cemetery. And it was one big hole, and they dropped to bed the casket. I have no idea where my father is buried. I just hope he rests in peace wherever he is. Then we had to come home and tell my mama that our father died and her husband died. And we finally told her, and she lost milk in one of her breasts. She had not had enough milk in her other breast to feed the child. And there was no nourishment, no milk to behold. And the child was just absolutely dying. So we asked one of the same guide that told us about the clinic, if there is anybody around here, or any farm around here that we can go and beg for a little bit of milk for the child. He says, yeah, it's about 5-6 miles if you can make it. Well, my sister and I decided we are going to make it to save our little brother's life. And we did in all that snow and all that cold weather. And we thought we'll never come back. And we finally found a little farm. And we explained to these people that we couldn't talk to them because we couldn't speak the language. And we tried to tell them that's for a baby, a little bit of milk. They finally understood. And they have given us a little bit of milk. And we carried it close to our body so it would not freeze. And we came back with a little bit of milk. And my mother took a piece of net, opened the child's mouth, and just dripped a little bit of milk, one drop at a time. Well, The child died of malnutrition anyway. He wasn't even a year old. And here my mother lost her husband, lost her child. She didn't want to live anymore. So she just laid there and didn't want to get up. And we hugged her and kissed her and loved her. He says, Mom, you have to. You have 2 daughters. And we wouldn't know what to do without you. Well, she finally realized that it's true, that she has 2 daughters to live for. And she finally got up, and we all went to work, and we survived. And we were there for about almost 4 years, till they told us we can leave this forsaken place, and we can go to warmer climate, but in Russia. So we decided to go. The elders decided to go. All of us will go to Kyrgyzstan. If you look it up on your map, you'll see it. It's Kyrgyzstan. And that's where we went. Of course, it was much warmer, and we worked so hard, maybe twice as much as we worked in Siberia. And then after a year, 1945, just before 1945, the war was over. And they told us we can go home. So we did go home to Poland after 5 miserable, long, terrible years. We come home to Poland, there's nobody left. My mother had 5 brothers, 3 sisters. My father had sisters and brothers, and their spouses and children. There was nobody left. There wasn't even a cemetery to go to. It was just, we were just alone. My sister, my mother, and I. We were the only one left on this earth from our family. Well, we had no papers. We had no country. We had nowhere to go. So they put us in displaced person. It's a DP camp in Germany. And we stayed there. And there was plenty to eat. But we couldn't eat because our stomach shrunk. And the more we tried to eat, the sicker we became. It took us a long time before we could swallow a piece of meat. It took us a long time before we could have a decent breakfast. We couldn't eat. Our eyes wanted to eat, but we couldn't. In 1947, Palestine at the time were asking a lot of young people to enlist to fight the Arabs. And me, I decided there is no future for me in this camp here. Maybe I should enlist and fight for something, maybe fight for a country that I don't even know, but it's Jewish country. So I have enlisted. And we, the English people were in Palestine, and they would not let any ships or any people get in. So we smuggled ourselves through. And from Le Havre, they took us to Le Havre, France. And from there we had a freight ships. And they took us to Israel. And that was, that's how I came in to be in Haifa, which I loved Haifa. I think it's the most